concept which we will use, a language which is called as UML or XML, Unified Markup Language, or extensible markup language, as they call it, right? So people who are from the IT background may understand what a UML or an XML is. If you don't understand what a UML or XML is, not to worry about it. We will cover certain bit and pieces about what is required from an ISO 20022 perspective, but I would highly recommend you all to check out a few links in the description where you can actually go through some tutorials about UML and XML modeling and how do we do that, right? So that will build a base for you to understand the concept like ISO 20022. Now, here in this slide, you can see some of the very, very important challenges and advantages, so to speak, about ISO 20022. In the last video on cross-border payment transactions, we had also covered those challenges. So if you haven't seen that video, please pause this, go to that video, the last one, the one just before this one, and come back to this video. Now, you can see the first point over there says about security, financial crime, AML sanctions. So basically the concept here is that any new standard that is being put forward, right, it has to be highly secure, because these days we are living in a world that is full of cyber crimes, cyber attacks, phishing attempts, and whatnot. So it's very important that we have systems designed which are highly secure. Now, because the XML format has this inherent nature of breaking down the data into granular levels, right? And we'll look into that in a few minutes from now as to what I'm talking about. Because of this nature, it sort of puts the overall architecture and the overall principle in a highly secure zone, right? So we will just look into that, but just understand this concept here that the security is of utmost importance when it comes to ISO 20022. There were truncated data formats in the previous messages, right? So the messages are flowing from one hop to the other, from one country to the other. When it comes to cross-border payment transactions, you are looking at things like a transaction that starts from US and goes all the way to Japan, and there are so many hops in the middle, so many countries, so many standards, so many operational procedures that a message has to go through, or a transaction has to go through, and there is always a chance of that being broken or getting fragmented somewhere in the middle, and that again adds to that cycle time of completing the transaction operationally and making sure that all the compliance checks are done. So this is again where ISO 20022 is actually supposed to be effective. Again, there are bit theories that there might be challenges on the truncated data formats in ISO 20022 also, and there are all sorts of theories. But then again, this is one of the things. There were a lot of limitations in the previous formats, for example I8583, and basically that's more like a legacy concept, right? Every single position in a message is actually fixed. So if there is an entity, for example, the bank account number, right? So there is a fixed position where you would read the bank account number. Now it's very rigid. You can't actually break that, right? It's so rigid. And when you pass this message from one system to the other, what happens is that if the system is designed to read that, it will accept it. If, for example, in some day the message position changes for some reason, right, the other system will say, no, sorry, I don't understand what this is all about. Even though the entire information might be there, but maybe it's a bit shifted position wise, but then the legacy system would say that, no, I would not understand this message. So, and this is not just in ISO 20022. If you look into any other use cases where you are talking about legacy migration, for example, right? You're talking about migrating the data from an old system to a new system. These old systems were designed in a way where they understood the language or the message in only that fixed position, right? So that's again something that we are trying to break with ISO 20022. We are going to use maximum use of analytics now that we have broken down the message. So for example, if I have a sentence, for example, if I just say that I am going to New York, right? So there are so many things in this message. There is I, as in there is an entity called as I, and there is something that's happening with I, as in he's doing something, he's going somewhere. Where is he going? He's going to New York. So all of this is combined in one sentence, right? But if I break this down into chunks and I say, okay, I is one chunk, going to is another chunk. Maybe I is a noun chunk, going to is more like a verb chunk. Again, New York is a place chunk or a noun chunk, whatever. So I have broken this message down into different components. Now imagine if there are thousands and millions of such messages, and I want to find out how many of the people in the month of September travel to New York, right? It's easy for me. I can just focus on the bits and pieces that I want to, and write some sort of algorithms. It's a very, very vague example, maybe not the best of the examples, but then the concept that I'm trying to tell you here is that when you break the data down into granular levels, let's say in a hierarchical fashion, in a tree-based structure, for example, it becomes easy to traverse down the data and exactly zoom in and focus on any particular entity that you want to, right? So that's very, very important key point. In fact, if at all it's possible, right, we will try to make some more content on how we can derive more analytics out of ISO 20022 formats, particularly in payment transactions. Automation, yes, obviously, because we want to make sure that there is a lot of operational efficiency that comes with any new standard. We wouldn't accept a standard if at all, the standard is very good in analytics, but then it sort of is bringing down the operational side of the things down, right? That would be a strict no-no with everyone. So the idea here is that ISO 20022 should also bring in the operational efficiency in the overall processes, right? When it comes to compliance, when it comes to KYC checks, etc., all different sorts of due diligence checks. The process are supposed to take lesser time than they used to, right? And the chances of a process being faltered down just because of a broken message or something like that has to be reduced. Reusability, everything is tag based here. So we have, again, this is a concept of XML, but the concept here is that because everything is tag based, you can reuse these tags, right? So for example, there's a tag called as place and it has a value called New York. I don't need to write this again and again. I can just simply take this tag and reuse it wherever I want to. So that's again the reusability part of it, right? So this is just to give you a gist of some of the use cases where ISO 20022 is going to be very, very effective. There could be more such things. I'm sure, if you go online or if you read a little bit on the internet about ISO 20022, particularly if you go to the SWIFT website or the ISO website, you can actually read a lot of interesting resources. I had personally gone through a lot of those resources when I was doing the research to come up with this video, right? So I would highly recommend all of you to check out those resources as well. I would be leaving the links in the description of the video. Okay, so make sure that you do check it out. Okay, a very, very important question that we all are asking, right? Like, does everybody need to migrate to ISO 20022, right? If I am a bank, I am the CEO of a bank, and the banking operations are running fine. I'm not a very big bank, I'm a mid-sized bank where I know that my operational efficiencies are maybe not the best in the world, but then, they are not even the worst. So I'm doing fairly good in all KPIs. The customers are happy. I have no major concerns when it comes to doing a migration of changing a messaging format, right? Now, should I actually look at moving to ISO 20022 in such cases? Well, there is a lot of, again, this is a question which doesn't have a clear yes and no answer, but I'm more inclined to say no here, simply because there is a lot of cost and there's a lot of resources that are involved with any migration exercise, right? So unless and until there is a very, very strong use case of why you want to migrate to ISO 200. Eventually, this is still a newer concept when it comes to payment, right? This is going to go live in November this year for cross-border payments, for example. Now, because this is a new concept in payments, right, there are still a lot of things, a lot of theories that need to be tested, right? So not everybody is in a rush to migrate to ISO 20022 as well. There could be a case where someone in a bank might just think that, oh, okay, maybe I will probably look at doing this next year, or rather, I'll just wait and watch how things unfold. So ISO 15022 messages, for example, they work fine in certain areas like corporate actions, security, settlements, and reconciliation, right? Non-payment areas. But then there is no such need for them to sort of move into ISO 20022. There are large legacy systems, that don't feel the need to migrate, like I just mentioned to you. The cost-benefit analysis needs to be done. And then again, there are standards, different standards, and that can coexist, right? Like there are some examples that I've put here. You may be living in a country where there is a left-hand drive, right? Like you have to drive using a left-hand drive wheel, or you could be staying in a country where there is a right-hand drive, right? If you are migrating from one country to the other, it doesn't mean that the countries need to also change their driving standards, right? They are simply coexisting today. If you drive in the US, if you drive in UK, if you drive in India, the drives are different, right? But they all coexist. Similarly, there are measurement units, right? Some countries they will measure in ounces. Some countries would measure in pints. Some countries would measure in liters. Again, different standards. Electric plugs, right? Very apt example of how different standards can coexist. Now, if you have a electric plug, and say if you are in a country like India, you would have a different sort of a configuration of that electric plug. Whereas in the UK or in the US, there's a different configuration. Now, all of these electric plugs are coexisting, right? It's not that all of the countries have to conform to one particular standard. They are still coexisting and everything is working fine. If somebody travels from one country to the other, well, simply he has to just get a converter in place and he can use his device in the other country also. Keyboards is another example, right? You have got different configurations. You have got a US keyboard, a British keyboard, and whatnot, a Japanese layout keyboard. So again, there are so many different aspects, not just payments, and so many different areas in life where different standards can coexist, right? So and therefore, just because there is a huge big wave coming in of ISO 20022 does not necessarily mean that everybody's ready and everybody's like, all guns blazing for this new concept. So just be wary of that fact. Now, in this slide, I have actually shown you the same concept of, I've just put the same concept of the plugs once again, right? What I'm trying to say here is that interoperability is one of the key levers of why everybody wants to push forward this concept of ISO 20022, right? What I mean is that there are so many different configurations of the plugs, and even though they coexist, it would be always a good idea to sort of have one configuration everywhere, right? So then it sort of removes that hassle of carrying a converter everywhere. It removes that sort of fear of not being able to use a device in another country because the plug configuration is different. Interoperability, right? That's the key word here that we have to understand. Same concept, right? Like there are so many financial languages that I have actually depicted here on the slide, and each of these languages is actually put across a kind of a plug icon, and you can see like there is fixed, there is MDDL, FPML, XPRL, RIXML, so many different formats, right? Wouldn't it be a really good idea if all of these converge to one common standard, something like a XML based standard which everybody understands, right? And that's where ISO 20022 is actually being pitched in as a player which can actually bridge this interoperability gap. Right, so we are going to look into how this whole structuring of ISO 20022 works. What we are all going to do is we are going to look at three different layers at which the ISO 20022 messaging formation is done. The first layer is the business modeling side of the things. The second layer is the logical message. And the third layer is syntax. How do you write it? It's for people who are coming in from an IT background. For them, it might be an easier thing to relate. Not that the others cannot relate, but all I'm saying is because, say, somebody who's coming in from a data modeling background, or somebody who is coming in from a business intelligence or a data warehousing background, right? They would understand these things a little bit better. So basically, the idea here is that there is a business problem, there is a business statement which is given to you, and you have to sort of model that business first of all to understand what are the nuances in that business, right? So when it's a payment transaction, you model that payment transaction, right? When you do a modeling using a technique like UML, for example, you always have this concept of having an actor, a use case, and things like that. What we basically do here is we say that these are the different permutations and combinations of the people who could do this transaction in payments. These are the different permutations and combinations of the kind of transactions that they can do. And these are the different permutations and combinations of other similar entities, right? And then it becomes very easy to sort of see that overall figure and say that, yes, this is making sense. This is how the overall design of how the business should look like when it comes to a payment transaction. So that's the first part of it. Now the second part is the logical message, where we say that, okay, logically, how do we write this out, right? Like sort of like a pseudocode kind of a thing, where we say that, okay, this is what I want to say. Maybe it's not the lowermost level of the technical language that I want to write it down, but then this is how the logical message should look like. And then the last one is the syntax. So what we will do is, we will take an example, we will go to the Miro board, we'll do some sketching over there and see how do we structure an ISO 20022 message, right? And then we'll come back to the presentation. There is a very good example that I have also added in the presentation. So make sure that once you're through with the Miro board sketching, we come back here and we look at that example. Before we go to the Miro board, let's look at a problem statement, okay, or rather a use case of how we would go ahead and do the business modeling, the logical modeling, and then the syntactical part of it. Right now, here on the screen, you can see that there is a example of a transaction. Okay, it's a very, very simple transaction, and this example says that there is a bank in Netherlands, in Utrecht, right? And there is a big code of that particular bank, and it has been requested by one of its corporate customers, and the details of those customers are also there, to transfer $12,500 on this particular date from its account to from this particular account number, right? So this is like a credit transfer transaction that you can think of. Now this is the problem statement, this is the use case, and we will now go ahead and look at how ISO 20022 structuring is done on the basis of those three layers. Now let's try to break this problem into various business components, right? So we understand that we have to do a payment, right? So that's one of the components here, which we will call it as payment, right? That's one of your components. Now there is a particular type of payment, which is a credit transfer that needs to be done. Yeah, so we are going to do a credit transfer. Now, what are the different actors who are there who would be responsible in these two processes, say for example, right? So there is this actor who is called as debtor, right, from whose account the money is going to be debited. There will be a creditor, okay, who will be getting the money credited into the account, into his account. Then there will be a creditor agent, okay. So this is your creditor agent. The second step is the logical message formation. Now what happens here in this logical message formation is that all of the information is actually added here in this stage, right? So all the description of all the information which is needed to perform a specific business activity, right? We still are not talking about the syntax, but let's just say that if there is a message component called credit transfer transaction information, right? Let's just write it down here. Credit transfer. This is the kind of transaction that we were looking at, right? It was a simple credit transfer. So it's a credit transfer transaction information. Let's say if information, okay. Let's say if this is the kind of your message, the message component, right? It will have 4 elements, okay. So there are 4 elements, right? We looked at the debtor, we looked at the creditor, yeah, and we then looked at the debtor agent, and we looked at the creditor agent. Debtor, creditor, debtor agent, and the creditor agent. Now, if I want to further structure this logically, how can I write this? So what I can say is that there is this particular logical step that needs to be done here, wherein I will say that this is my credit transfer transaction information. Okay, so this is my credit transfer transaction information, and that's my message component. So this will be my message component. Okay, now what are the message elements? So this section here that you see will have my message element. And what would be the message element? The message element will be what is the settlement amount. So I will say that there is a settlement amount that's needed, which is, say for example, a USD 12,500. Okay, then when is this expected to be settled? So yeah, the settlement date has to be added here. And I will say that the date is, in this particular case, it's 2019 10 9th of October. Then I will say that there are the details of the debtor and the debtor agent here. And how are these details then mapped here logically? So what we will do is we will create another logical box here, and we will say that the debtor details are here. Now this is your another logical box called as party identification. Okay, so this is your another box called as party identification. Here I will say that this is the name of the party, right? Like for example, whatever the party is, I will just put the name of that party here. And then I will say that there is another entity which I want to incorporate here, which is your postal address. Okay, I will say that this party identification is another block. And within this party identification, I would like to add another entity called as postal address. Now this entity, I will again link it here, but it's a separate logical entity in itself. And that is how we keep on modeling the data logically. So I will say that this is your postal address. Okay, so this is now fetched from here, from this box. And I will put the address details here, right? So address is this much, this is the town, and this is your country. Yeah, so something I will add here, and I will say that this is the details here. Okay, so this is how we add the postal address. Now when it comes to the debtor agent, right? So this is where we have all the details. Okay, let's put an arrow here. So we say that the debtor party details are here, right? So we have added the debtor party details here. Then the party details are further structured logically, saying that the postal address details come from another entity, and which we have again segregated and added here. Now let's talk about the debtor agent. So for the debtor agent, we create another logical entity here, and we say that this is your financial institution identification. Okay, now pay attention to how we have logically segregated the name of these entities here, right? So when it's the debtor agent, I'm saying that this is a financial institution, right? Because this is the institution which is actually facilitating the payment, right? When it came to the debtor details himself, I said that this is the party. Okay, so that's the corporate account from where the credit transfer was started, right? So that's basically the party. But here I'm saying it's the financial institution identification. And again, because it's a financial institution identification, my message elements, this body here, right? This body is called as your message element here. This is again for all of these boxes. This is your message element. Element. So here I will say that this is your BIC. Okay, so maybe some identification code. I will say, A B C D E 1 2, something like that. Yeah, I'll just put it here, 1 2 U, and then I will say that okay, here are the other details, right? So the name, and then the postal address, and so on, so forth, right? And again, if I want to structure this further down, I can do that. So that is basically how we are going to logically break this down. Now, if I look here, what we have done is we have actually created. Firstly, let's just do a summary of this, right? So we created the business model side of the things here, right? This is your first step. Business modeling. Okay, so once you have done the business modeling side of it, again, if you are new to this business modeling concept, like I mentioned in the previous part of the video, I will be leaving a link in the description, which you can go and understand how do you do UML modeling. It's very, very simple, very, very easy. There is no rocket science to it. You just have to dedicate some time, pay attention to the concept, and that's about it. You will learn it. Okay, the more you practice, the more fluent you will be to understand these things. And particularly if you are a business analyst or someone who is actually dealing with the architecture side and the data modeling side, and I'm sure that you might be aware of this already. This is your business modeling side of the things. This is your logical message formation side of the things. So far, so good. Now the third step here is your XML part. Okay, so here I will say that I will use the XML formation. That is your final step, right? Why this is your final step? Because these two things are basically more of a logical and a business understanding related side. So therefore, machines will not be able to read them, right? What the machines will read is your XML, which is basically a code, right? Okay, so the third step, which is your XML formation, is what we will look at now. Okay, so this is your third step, and I am just drawing this, or rather putting this just besides the logical formation step, so that you can do that comparison as well and see, right, how we are converting it from a logical to an XML step. Now, XML is a tag based language, right? Everything that you have in an XML is actually incorporated in a tag. Okay, a tag is like an entity that you make, and every single thing that you want to put in that entity will be denoted by this tag. This is how you open a tag. And then if you want to close the tag, you simply just go and put a forward slash inside the brackets here and say that I want to close the tag. Okay, so this means that whatever additional information that you want to put, you can put it here in the middle and you can close the tag. So everything is now held inside this tag. The good thing here is that you can actually break this down into different modules, right? Just the way we have done it here. As you can see, we have broken this logical message down. Similarly, you can break down the tags as well. So when you break down the tags, it will be like, this is your first tag. Okay, ABC, for example, I open the tag from here. Now within ABC, I may want to open another tag. Okay, I will say that I will want to open another tag, which is say DEF. Okay, that is my second tag, right? This is the child tag inside this one. And then whatever information I want to put in DEF, I will put it here, and I will close DEF, and then I will finally close ABC. Now you see what has happened here. It's a tag based structure. That's it. It's a hierarchical model, right? So if I just collapse ABC, everything including DEF will be hidden inside ABC, and then if I expand it, I can see that which are the different child tags inside ABC. Now same thing if I want to model, right, besides the logical model for a credit transfer, I can simply say that this is my credit transfer transaction reference. Okay, right? That's what my main parent tag is. Inside that, I will say that the amount, right, the settlement amount is US dollars 12,500. Okay, so I will say that this is my settlement amount here, and I will close this tag. Okay, so I will just say settlement amount is now closed here. Settlement amount, right? Then what I will do is I will say the currency. So I will say currency, open the tag, I will say USD, and then I will close the tag of currency also here. Okay, and likewise I will put the details of the debtor also. Okay, I will open a tag called as debtor, and I will say that this is the name of the debtor. I will open another tag for the name, one more tag for the postal address, right, and so on, so forth. So one more tag for the postal address, and then I will keep on closing these tags as well. So so name, and then I will close the name here. Postal address, I will close it here, and so on. And then I will close the debtor tag once I have all the details of the debtor inside it. Okay, then I can have another one which will be like a debtor account or the debtor agent, I'm sorry. Okay, so I will say that this is my debtor agent, and then all the details inside it, and then close the debtor agent. And if you look at the screen, debtor agent. So if you look at the screen, this is how the model will look like. Okay, this is how eventually the structure will look like. You can use any text editor like a Notepad++, Edit Plus, whatever you are comfortable with, and you can start practicing this. If you have any difficulties, there are lots of tutorials online of how XML formation is done. It's very, very simple. But if you are someone who is going to work on ISO 20022, particularly the migration side of the things, it's very, very important that you are very comfortable with these things. Okay, so please make sure that you go back and spend some time to understand this. Okay, so now that we have seen how the XML formation is done and all of those three layers that are required to form an ISO 20022 message, let's look at some of these things here. So this is just like a typical structure that I just showed you, but in a more formatted way on the presentation. A credit transfer transaction information, and it's broken down into various different child nodes. Same thing what we have just seen in the logical way and then the XML syntax way, right? Tomorrow, if I want to add another entity, say amount, I can just go ahead and add it at the level where I have my currency, date, and debtor details, right? So you see that plus over there, and then the amount, that's basically to indicate that if I want to add a new entity, I can do that. The important bit to understand here is what is the right level of where this information needs to be added, right? Because that's the whole essence of using this ISO 20022 format, that you must know where exactly is that entity supposed to be added, which is the right place of that entity. What is the level? Like for example, if this amount I go ahead and add maybe in a different node, say for example in the address, right? It wouldn't make sense there, isn't it? So address will have its own entities and its own characteristics. Similarly, the amount is basically an entity that is at a level where it's a transaction level detail, right? So the transaction level detail is what? It's something like a currency, it's something like a date, and then the amount, right? Typical things that make up a transaction. If I say that I have done a transaction for $20, what are the typical things? When did you do the transaction? What was the amount? Who was the party? All those things. So all of these entities are the same level. Okay, so that's the important bit that you have to understand. Right, now I will show you a diagram here. Okay, you can see the diagram here on the screen. And in this diagram, I have tried to indicate the difference between the MT and MX series, right? So MT is the messaging series which we have ongoing, for example, 50.22, right? And the MX is the new ISO 20022 format. The first part of the slide there shows you how the MT series players look like and how is a typical flow. There is no difference. All that is different is the terminology. That's the only thing, right? It's like you can say that it's like old wine, new bottle. Yes, there are improvements, significant improvement when it comes to messaging, but then the overall flow of the information still remains the same. What do I mean by that? So if you look into the slide on the upper part, okay, there are some players I have indicated. There is an originator, there is an originating bank, sending bank, receiving bank, beneficiary bank, and the beneficiary. Let's say if it's a cross-border transaction, right? As we discussed in the last video, how does a cross-border transaction work? The originator will start the transaction, and then he will have his originating bank know about it, that he wants to initiate this transaction. The originating bank will then initiate a message, which is like an MT103, right? If it's a transfer message, it's an MT103. It will go to the sending bank, and then the sending bank will further give it to the receiving bank. The message gets passed on, and then the receiving bank will give it to the beneficiary bank. What is this bank? This is the bank where the recipient is holding his account, right? And the beneficiary bank will let the recipient know that the amount has been transferred. On the either sides of the originator and the beneficiary, this particular arrow here that you see, right? This could be their own internal proprietary of how the bank wants to communicate it to the customer, right? But from the bank onwards, from the originating bank onwards to the beneficiary bank, it's all driven through the MT103. And the confirmation is then received in the form of an MT900 message, right? Look, at every stage you then get the confirmation. So beneficiary bank will indicate that yes, the acknowledgement has been provided, and the acknowledgement comes all the way back to the originating bank. Typical standard flow of how the MT series works. Now, if you look into the MX series, which is the ISO 20022 series, it's exactly the same. I have only renamed the names here, right? So they have just come up with some fancy names. So originator is now the debtor here, and beneficiary is now the creditor here, as you can see on the screen. Okay, and the debtor agent, instructing agent, there are two instructing agents, and then is the creditor agent, right? So the originating bank is now being called as the debtor agent. The beneficiary bank here is now being called as the creditor agent. And then the sending bank is the instructing agent, first instructing agent here, and the receiving bank is the second instructing agent. But what changed here? You see the message format has now changed. It's now called as PAX. Okay, so there are different kind of message formats that you will see in ISO 20022, right? There is a series of messages. I'll put up on the screen here so you can sort of see those message types. But here, for example, if it's a credit transfer, I will just say that it's a PAX.008 message. Now, this nomenclature is something that we will again see, how do we write this? Okay, so that's again something that I'll either put on the screen. The PAX message is then flown all across here, and then you get back a PAX.002 message back as a confirmation. Okay, same thing. If you see, there is no difference. Now here, there is a shaded box that you can see in the middle, right? What I've tried to indicate here is that all these entities, whether it's MT103, 900, 008, 002 PAX, they all are doing the same thing eventually, right? It's just that the message format has differed, but in the whole overall payments processing cycle, they still fall in the same place where they should be. Okay, so it's just the format that has changed, nothing else. There is one more thing that I wanted to show. This is again a very interesting snippet that I have taken from the Swift website. Okay, on the left hand side, I have shown you a typical empty message. Okay, and on the right hand side, I have shown you how the 2002 to MX format message would look like. Now you can see how the structuring has been done for an empty message here. There is a basic header block right here at the top, and then there is an application header block. Okay, here you can see that. Okay, and then there is a user header block, and then the text, all of the transaction details, the payload details, basically, right? They all go here. Who's the party, in the amount, the date, etc., etc. Right, and then eventually there is a trailer block where the message ends. In the ISO 20022 world, this whole thing is a little different, right, in terms of the structuring. The SwiftNet headers are located here, as you can see at the top. Okay, but the request payload is what we are interested in. Okay, so that's the critical bit here. The request payload is basically an envelope which is containing your business message. And the business message comprises of the application header and the business document. Okay, so there will be a header and the business document. So business document will contain the MX ISO 20022 message instance. Now that is something that they have tried to zoom in and have indicated here. So this document, how does it look like? There will be an application header. Okay, the same header what you see here in the box is being denoted with a tag, an XML tag here. So there's an application header and then the document here, right? The details. So this is all your XML format in an ISO 20022 compliance way. Okay. So this is your business message. And it's the same message that I just showed you how we are forming, right? But I'm just trying to draw a parallel between an MT and an MX series here, using a practical example, a real life example of how the message looks like in MT, and then how the structuring will be done in ISO 20022 format. So this is a bit of a longish video, but I think I